Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. Just hot off the press, U.S. President Donald Trump is set to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping within the next couple of days. This comes after Trump made good on his campaign promise to raise tariffs, announcing duties of 10% on all Chinese goods coming into the country.
It's setting up to be a major diplomatic exchange as the two superpowers seek a deal that could avert a broader trade war. In response to Trump's tariffs so far, Chinese officials have vowed to file a complaint with the World Trade Organization and take other countermeasures, but also left the door open for talks with the United States.
So will we see a full-blown trade war between the world's two largest economies, or is there a middle ground? For more insights, we're joined by Dawn Wei, China Bureau Chief at the Straits Times. Dawn, welcome to Money FM. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. It's always great to chat with you. So lots to talk about today, with Donald Trump back in the White House. Chinese businesses are bracing for yet another round of tariffs. So just how significant and far-reaching will this 10% tariff be for them?
Well, I think it could be perhaps manageable for a while. Some of the American importers may absorb the taxes, or the Chinese exporters may have to do that. Or perhaps what might happen again, as it did during Trump's first trade war with China, is that the American consumers will end up being the ones to stomach the higher prices. I think the hope is that these tariffs may not stick because it could lead to inflation in the U.S., and that would be an own goal for Trump.
Okay, Dawn, Josh Lipsky, the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomic Center and a former advisor to the IMF, has come out and said that Beijing could devalue its yuan, which I suppose would make its currency cheaper and boost its exports to blunt the impact, as with what happened the last time around. Is that the direction we should be expecting Beijing's rhetoric to go, and why?
Yeah, there is that tool in its toolkit, but some economists think that China doesn't need to go down that path yet because the macro outlook for China's economy this year has already factored in new tariffs by Trump. Also, the renminbi now is already quite weak, and China's exports to the U.S. have to be considered against its trade with the rest of the world. Almost half of its $1 trillion trade surplus is with countries other than the U.S. So it still has to keep the yuan stable instead of devaluing it to make exports cheaper, especially when it already enjoys such a large trade surplus.
Yeah, so despite rising tensions, Dawn, data has shown that China's overall exports, including to the U.S., have continued to grow in recent months. So what's your take on what's driving this resilience, despite all of this uncertainty in the horizon? And should we expect this momentum to last and continue in the months ahead?
A few factors. One is there's been front-loading ahead of the tariffs. Businesses are rushing out shipments to avoid the higher costs that will come, and this has boosted export figures. Two, there is strong global demand for Chinese goods, despite the trade tensions. Its goods from its high-tech sectors like integrated circuits and automobiles have remained quite robust. And thirdly, China has also been diversifying its trade partners and expanding trade relationships with regions like Southeast Asia and Latin America to make up for the reduced exports to the U.S. and the EU. But once the effects of front-loading wears off and the tariffs kick in, then the picture might be a little bit more murky as to whether export growth can be sustained. It will depend on how trade tensions and global demand play out.
All right, perhaps this might not come as a surprise to some, but the overwhelming majority of Chinese analysts have struck a pretty pessimistic tone when it comes to trade and the economy, largely because Trump's first 4 years in office left pretty little room for optimism about the next 4 years. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think China is very clear-eyed this time that the next 4 years of Trump will be tumultuous and bumpy, to say the least. It is much more prepared this time to deal with Trump after having gamed out different scenarios. But there is still plenty of unpredictability given Trump's nature. And also we've seen his choice of stacking his cabinet with China hawks like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. And that, I think, is a signal to Beijing that it will be a target in more ways than one. Also, the American view of China as an existential threat, that has also taken root. So as these two major powers close the gap on tech advancements, like what DeepSeek has done, and on economic strength, I think the expectation is that the U.S. will double down to try and contain China.
All right, Dawn, let's look at how China is doing. So China's economy actually grew 5% last year, meeting official targets, but in a somewhat lopsided fashion. Citizens have complained of, worsening living standards as Beijing struggles to transfer its industrial and export gains to consumers. So what economic policies might Beijing introduce this year to stimulate growth? And could we see possibly more targeted support for key industries?
Yeah, we're expecting to see some more monetary and fiscal stimulus this year. That is a continuation of various stimulus measures that were deployed late last year. And these could come in March when the leadership meets for its annual parliamentary session known as Liang Hui. And that is also when they will set the growth target for this year. The government has already indicated that boosting consumption is its top priority this year. So we will see more policies around that. For instance, maybe more trade-in subsidies or increased social spending like higher pension payouts. But its strategic focus will still be on developing new quality productive forces by boosting innovation and productivity in high-end sectors like artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, green energy, and also advanced manufacturing. So we could see substantial support for these industries.
All right, Dawn, let's come back to Trump's next 4 years. Now, we've all seen the era of Trump 1.0 and what transpired in those first 4 years. How challenging do you expect conversation between the U.S. and China will be over the next four as Trump trudges ahead in his second term? It looks more likely that it's going to be more uncertain than the last term.
Yeah, I think it's hard to be optimistic given what went down during the 4 years of Trump's first term, where the U.S.-China relationship essentially plunged to the lowest depths in decades then. There are some analysts who choose to be optimistic by hanging their hopes on Trump's transactional nature, and they believe that because of that, there is space for negotiation. But other than a trade war, I think a tech war could really escalate now that China has made quite significant advances on many fronts compared to Trump's first. And there will be even greater pressure for the U.S. administration to take action or to deny China of U.S. tech and know-how. And this will exacerbate tensions between the two countries. And also Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy also introduces elements of unpredictability, and I think that could also destabilize the relationship further.
Yeah, you talked about avoiding a full-blown trade war. We saw that Donald Trump has repealed his tariffs or reversed the move on tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Do you think there's a chance that he might hit the pause button on China as well?
Yes, there could be. I mean, I think because of this transactional nature, everything is on the table, up for discussion. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to look at this optimistically, yeah, it is possible that there is room for negotiation.
All right, as the U.S. and China navigate this latest trade standoff, we'll be keeping a close eye on how both sides respond as Trump and Xi gear up to speak regarding the 10% tariff within the next couple of days. Dawn, a pleasure as always. Thanks for your time and insights today.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, thank you. That was Dawn Wei, China Bureau Chief at the Straits Times. You're listening to Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg. or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.